Hey there and welcome to section 2. In this video we're going to go over the different types of layers in Photoshop and show you how to filter through those different types. Now your different types of layers, basically you have pixel layers, which is like your images, right? You have things like shape layers where you can create triangles and squares, circles, and things like that. You've got type layers, and with that you can actually type on your image, and you've got smart objects, which actually are saved as reference files that allow you to do non-destructive editing. So let's go ahead and show you guys how all of that works. Start by opening up our image here. We're going to double click on our background. We're going to go to we're in chapter 2, section 2, layer types.jpg. And I just love this image. Look at that dog. He is a happy guy. So we're going to start off here. You can see we have our background layer. I'm going to create a new layer right above our background, and I'm going to go to my gradient tool. So let's hit G for the gradient tool, or you can just go right over here to your gradient tool. Okay, now with our gradient tool we have a few different options. Here at the very top we have different options for how we'd like to create our gradient. So I'm going to click on the first option here, which is a linear gradient. Okay, now next option we have here up the top left is our gradient editor. So let's go ahead and click there. Now we're going to use this gradient right here that says foreground or transparent. So you may be on one of these other gradients by default. Let's click on this one that says foreground to transparent and hit OK. Basically what this is going to do is it's going to fade from your foreground color to transparent, to invisible. Okay, and your foreground color is located right here. So what I want to do is click here on my foreground color, and then I want to choose a new color for my foreground color. So if I just hover over my image itself, I get a little eyedropper, and I can actually pull colors from my image itself. So right there, that looks pretty good. So let's hit OK there. All right, so here we can see our foreground color is this blue color. You can see the little preview here at the top. It's going to go from blue to invisible, and we are on our gradient with a linear gradient. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is just add a little bit more detail to this sky. So let's go ahead and click on the top and drag down. So click and drag, and you can see you can have this go in any direction you'd like. Now I just want this to go straight down, so I'm going to hold the shift key, okay, and we're just going to go straight down right about there. Boom, and there we go. So we can see we have our little gradient coming from the top down, and that looks pretty good. Let's just lower the opacity just a little bit, and we've added some more detail to our sky. All right, now all that was done on a pixel layer. So what I'm actually doing is affecting the pixels on this layer, and pixels are just like, if I just zoom way in, let's go to our puppy's face here. See, these are pixels, okay? Like this is one pixel. It's just defined as that color, and then this is another pixel that's that color. This is another one that's that color. This is just tiny little squares of colors that, you know, when you're zoomed out, they all blend together to make your image. So that's what a pixel layer is. Now, up here in the very top, make sure your search is set to kind. These are the different layer types that we're going to cover in this section. So the first layer type is pixel layer. So if I click there, you're going to see it basically is just going to show me all my pixel layers, which in this case, everything's a pixel layer, right? This, what I just made here, that's made up of pixels, and our background is made up of pixels as well. So again, a pixel layer basically just has to do with filling tiny little squares with color. Now our next type of layer is called an adjustment layer, and this will actually adjust your image as a whole. For instance, you could bring your exposure up or down. You could add more color or subtract color from your image as well. So let's go ahead and show you how to make an adjustment layer. So your adjustment layers, you'll see your little icon right here. This is show me just the adjustment layers, okay? Right now it's going to say no layers match this. So if you want to make a new adjustment layer, go to Layer, down to New Adjustment Layer, and here you can make your adjustment layers. Okay, I'm going to go to Hue/Saturation. Let's hit OK there. So hue saturation. Now you'll also notice this little icon right down here. You can create adjustment layers by clicking on this also. So let's click and hold there, and you can see hue saturation. It's the same menu that's up in your menu options there. Okay, so our hue saturation adjustment layer, here what I'm going to do is take my saturation, and I'm just going to bring it to the right a little bit. Okay, we're making our image more saturated. Okay, and you can see it starts to look pretty bad right about there. If I go to the left, we're going to get less saturated. Okay, Now we are working with a JPEG that's been compressed. That's why you see like little artifacts and things like this. If you are working with a JPEG, you might see some degradation with your file. So whenever possible, I recommend working with a raw file or original photograph. That's going to give you the most possible information. For now, let's go ahead and just lower this saturation. So I'm going to just take my saturation slider, and we're just going to lower this down just a little bit. Not too far, but just right about there. We'll get a nice desaturated image. So again, this is an adjustment layer. So if I turn this off or on, you can see my effect turns off and on as well. Okay, now I can lower the opacity of this adjustment layer, making it more or less visible. And I have what's known as a layer mask on this layer as well. Now a layer mask will allow me to hide or show different parts of a layer. So a white layer mask is going to be totally visible. A black layer mask, totally invisible. So let me just use my brush tool real quick. I'm going to go ahead and take my saturation all the way down to 0, so we'll just make this black and white. Now again, check it out. We have a white layer mask, right? So that's meaning this layer, this hue saturation adjustment layer, is going to be totally visible. And what I'm doing with this hue saturation adjustment layer is I'm bringing my saturation down to 0. So basically this layer is just turning my image black and white, right? Now, if I click on my layer mask and I paint with my brush tool, so let's hit B for the brush tool. All right, let's go ahead and make a smaller brush. I'm going to paint with black on my layer mask. And everywhere that I paint with black is just going to hide this layer. Okay, this adjustment layer is just being hidden everywhere I paint with black. And we're seeing basically it's just revealing the image underneath it. Okay, now if I paint with white, if I switch my color to white and I paint with white, you can see I'm able to paint back the effect of this adjustment layer. Alright, so all adjustment layers will come with their own layer masks, and you can create a layer mask on any type of layer. Now, if I want this to be totally visible, I'm going to go to Edit, down to Fill, and we're going to fill this with white, hit OK, and there we go. So we have a completely filled adjustment layer with white. So now we've gone over our pixel layers, and we've gone over adjustment layers. So let's go ahead and show you guys how to filter by pixel or adjustments. Again, here on the very top, you have your pixel layers. So if you can see, I click there, we're only going to see our pixel layers. There we go. If I click here, we're only going to see our adjustment layers. Okay, and next it's time for type. So this can be really helpful, especially when you're doing a complicated edit. Maybe you have 20 or 30 layers. I've edited images that have over 100 layers on them, especially when you're doing complicated composite photographs, which we have some great tutorials on compositing here on Phlearn. So there will come a time when you're going to have a bunch of different layers. So being able to filter these layers is super important. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to our type layers. So we've already worked with these before. To create a type layer, all you have to do is grab your type tool. All right, let's go ahead and click on the top of our image, and I'm going to create Fun in the Sun. There we go. That's the title for this image, Fun in the Sun. Now, I'm going to go ahead and go to Select, and then down to Select All. There we go. So you can see it makes a selection of my entire document there. And then I'm going to hit my Move tool, which brings up our alignment controls. And we're going to cover all this in more depth later in this tutorial, by the way. And I'm going to click here on the center alignment, which is going to align that to the center of my document based on my selection. So let's go ahead and deselect that by hitting Control or Command D. There we go. So this is a type layer. Now you can change the type here in your properties window. You can change aspects of your type, but if you really want to get in and fine tune the type, go to Window and down to Character, where you'll be able to change things like your font. There we go. You can see all kinds of things like that. You can change your size, you can change the font weight, you can change spacing between your letters, between the different lines, and you can even have things like your, all caps, faux bold, faux italics, all these different options within your type. Now by default, type layers don't come with their own layer masks, but you could always add a layer mask if you'd like. So let's go ahead and close all that stuff up. I'm going to click here on my layer mask icon, so you can see now we have a layer mask. So if I decide to use my brush tool and paint black, you can see I can just paint this away if I want to. Okay, or I can paint white. There we go. Or I could use my gradient tool, for instance, go black to white, and then I could just fade it in from the top down if I'd like to do that as well. All right, now if you don't need a layer mask, you can just click on your layer mask and drag it right down to your trash can. There we go, and we'll say delete that layer mask. So here is your type layer. So let's see our pixel layers. There we go, our adjustment layer and our type layer. Already we can go ahead and start to use this. Let's say like, okay, cool, we made our image black and white, but you know what, I'm like, I don't want this image black and white. I like the color on this image. Let me try to find that adjustment layer that I used to make this black and white and just turn it off. Okay, now obviously it's super easy to find because we only have like 4 layers, but our example says, okay, cool, let's click on our adjustment layers. Oh, there it is. Let's just turn that off and then we're good to go. So that's kind of the idea behind filtering through your different layers. So our next layer type is called a shape layer. This will allow you to create custom shapes in Photoshop. Let's go ahead and click on our shape tool. So it's right over here, may look like a little rectangle. It's under your type tool. So let's click here, and I'm going to click on the rounded rectangle tool. So the rounded rectangle tool, one of my favorites, by the way. I'm just going to click and drag here right around Fun in the Sun. There we go. And we're just going to see we have some options here in our property window for our rounded rectangle. Okay, now the first option here, you see fill and stroke, and you're going to see the same things right here. That's your fill and that's your stroke. So let's just click on it up here because it actually says the words. So fill, this is what it's actually going to fill with. So you can see you could fill it with all kinds of different fun colors. Let's just fill it with like a light pink for now. That looks great. Now our stroke, this is going to be the color that's right around it. So let's just go ahead and choose something like our dark blue. There we go. And you can change how large you'd like your stroke to be. All right. Now this is also a rounded rectangle, right? We chose the rounded rectangle tool. So here you can adjust the radius of all your corners. So right now they're all linked together, which means if I adjust one, they're all going to adjust at the same time. There we go. And you could unlink them if you wanted, just have the top left be a, a little point if you wanted to do that. All right, let's go ahead and link those back up, and there we go. Let's just type in, make sure it says the same as the other ones, 165, and link that back up. Let's just make it a little smaller. Okay, now here you can see that the rounded rectangle is on top, like I'm looking at my layers here, right? The rounded rectangle is on top of my type layer that says Fun in the Sun. So what I'm going to do is just click on this layer and drag it up. Bonk! And there we go. We can see it's now on top of this layer. So we have a whole section devoted to organizing and moving and working with layers. But basically you can see that if a layer is on top, it's going to cover up the layers that are underneath it. Here we now have our Fun in the Sun over top of our text. Now, that's all cool. Let's go ahead and get out of there and say, okay, we got our fun shape layer, but you know what? I don't really like what I did there. I don't like this, blue border with the pink background. I don't think I like that at all. So let's just go back to our rounded rectangle. Not a problem, because with any shape in Photoshop, so here you can see your shape tool, rectangle tool, ellipse tool, polygon tool, any of these shapes can be changed at any time. So let's go back to our shape tool here. We're going to go to Window and down to Properties. There we go. And I'm going to take my fill color here, and we'll just say no fill. So that little slash there, that's going to be no fill there. Now I'm going to take my stroke color. Let's click there, and I'm going to click on my colors and just go all the way to white. That looks pretty good. And I just want to make sure that this is about the same width. The stroke width is about the same as the little letters themselves. So I'm just going to click here, and we'll just drag that up just a little bit. There we go. And you can always type in numbers here. So if I just type in 40 and hit enter, yeah, that looks pretty good. Let's type in 45. All right, that looks pretty good, and that's my stroke width there. So let's grab our move tool, and here we can see now our rounded rectangle looks a lot like our type. So I'm going to hold Control or Command, and because I want to click on both of these layers, because right now this Fun in the Sun looks pretty good, but I want it to be exactly centered here inside of that other layer, right? So what I'm going to do is hold Control or Command and click on both of these layers. So you can see now they're both selected. I'm going to click on my Move tool. I've got my alignment options right here. So I'm going to go ahead and vertically align them and horizontally align them. And you can see even if I just put this like right over here and select these two, I can click on align them vertically and align them horizontally, and there we go. It fits this layer directly inside of the other one, and that's how alignment works as well. And we're going to cover that in more in depth. So here we have, let's go ahead and turn all of our layers on that we've made so far. So we can see we're starting to work on the image, right? So here we have our pixel layers. There we go. We can turn any of these off or on, remember. We have our adjustment layers, turn these off or on. Now we have our type layers, there we go, and our shape layers, so we can turn that off or on as well. Now the last type of layer is known as a smart object, and smart objects are super cool. Basically, this will allow you to create any layer or any object itself. You can turn these into smart objects, and then you can use things like smart filters on these smart objects. So we're going to cover smart objects more in depth later, but by default, let's go ahead and show you guys how to make a smart object. So you can make any layer into a smart object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and let's show all of our layers here. Let's just turn our filters off. My fun in the sun and my rounded rectangle, I'm going to click on those, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to go to convert to a smart object. And what it's going to do is it's going to put both of those layers together and make them into a smart object. Okay? Now, before I do that, I'm just going to click here and drag it to my new layer icon, and that's going to make duplicates of those layers. Okay, so now you can see we have basically duplicates. Now, let's right click, and I'm going to go to convert to smart object. It's going to put them in the sun, it's going to put them in the same, and let's just call this smart object. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and apply a little blur to this smart object. So let's go ahead and make these layers invisible. I'm going to go to filter, blur, and then let's give this a Gaussian blur. This is just a quick example. So you can see I was able to blur this smart object. And by default, you can't blur text. It's just a little aside there. But making that into a smart object allows me to blur that. Now you can see we have our smart object, and we can have our smart filters, and I can turn these filters off or on at any time. So if you did want to add a blur or any other type of filter, it's a good idea to make that object a smart object first. Now, what we see here is that this smart object, it kind of, like before, we had text, right, that was editable, and we had a rounded rectangle that was editable. But I put those together into basically the same layer, and now you're like, well, is my text still editable? And it is. That's the whole benefit of smart object. It basically takes whatever layers you decide you want to be together, whatever layers you bake into a smart object, you can still edit those layers. You just have to open up your smart object. So it's really easy to do. Basically, let's just go ahead and close this out so you can see what we're doing. Basically, all you have to do is just double click on your smart object, and here you can see all of your layers are still intact. Alright, so if I double click on here and I type in fun in the sun, right, there we go. Let's go ahead and align that. And I save this, there we go. You can see it automatically saves right here. And I can turn this blur off at any time. Okay, so it basically is a way to save a reference of individual layers or individual files. So now that we've gone over all of our different layer types, let's go ahead and use our filtering to go back through them. Let's go back to our pixel layers here. So we can see our pixel layers. We have our gradient at the top and our background. We have our adjustment layers where we can turn this black and white. There are a lot of things you can do with adjustment layers, and we have a great pro tutorial called How to Master Adjustment Layers if you guys are interested. So let's go ahead and turn that off for now. Go to our type layers. We can turn that off because we have this one as a smart part of our smart object. Our shape layer, we can turn that off or on as well. And back to our smart objects, here we can see our smart object. So let's see, maybe I'll turn that off, and then I'll just turn on my fun in the sun and rounded rectangle, and we'll say, hey, we don't need to use a smart object right now. So there we have it, guys, a real quick example of all of the different types of layers in Photoshop, as well as how to filter those layers for making browsing easier. So that's it for this section. In our next video, we're going to show you how to organize and group layers together, because as you can see, layers kind of build up pretty rapidly, and if you're not careful, it can get really confusing. So we're going to show you how to organize and make sure everything stays very easy to find. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you in the next video.